Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea estimated to see around 2,000 new COVID-19 infections when it releases its daily tally in a couple of hours. The uptick coming as around 70% of the population is forecast to be vaccinated by the end of October. A global crunch in supply chains. US President Joe Biden says his administration is working 24/7 to move more goods faster and strengthen America's supply chains. Plus, the South Korean smash hit drama Squid Game has officially reached 111 million fans around the world, making it Netflix's biggest series launch ever. Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on Thursday, October 14th here in Seoul, South Korea. We are one step closer to the weekend now. I'm Mark Broom.
And I'm Kim Mo-gan. It's great to have you with us. Over the next hour, we are going to be taking a look at the big news stories of the day and get some expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
We certainly are. And we're going to start with the latest on the coronavirus situation in South Korea, as we normally do. Just like the authorities were warning us about, the number of new COVID-19 cases is gradually ticking up now, it seems. But vaccination rates, on the other hand, they are also rising, putting South Korea very much on the brink of reaching its goal of having 70% of the population vaccinated and reaching that goal earlier than expected.
For more on this and other COVID-19 related updates, joining us live in the studio is our reporter Shin Yeun. Good morning, Yeun.
Good morning.
Good morning, Yeun. So let's start with the forecast for Thursday, a couple of hours before the official tally comes out. But how are the estimates looking?
Right, so what we currently know is that the number of new COVID-19 cases will be near the 2,000 mark, and that's because from midnight to 9 p.m. on Wednesday, 1,832 infections were confirmed, and that's 361 more than the same period on the previous day. 8 out of 10 locally transmitted cases are in the greater Seoul area, and today will be the 100th straight day that South Korea has seen daily COVID-19 figures stay in the quadruple digits.
Now, Yeun, we are also seeing vaccination rates pick up speed. How many people have been vaccinated so far in South Korea?
Right, so the majority of the population have received both jabs, but to give you exact numbers, 60.8% are considered fully vaccinated, and more than 70% of the adult population have had 2 shots. Vaccination rates have really picked up pace over the past few months. In July, only 10% had received both jabs, and South Korea has expanded vaccinations by nearly 50% in just a few months.
Well, that's quite a major achievement. There was some criticism that at the outset things were going rather slowly, but they have picked up pace. So based on the current projections, it seems like more and more people are going to go and get a shot in the weeks and months to come.
You're absolutely right, and authorities believe that full vaccination rates could surpass 70% within around 10 days if vaccinations continue at the current pace. Take a listen.
We expect vaccination rates to surpass 70% in the week of October 25th. We'll do our best to reach this rate even sooner.
And although Korea could be crossing the 70% vaccination mark much quicker than expected, authorities are still trying to expedite the process because they want to start gradually easing restrictions in November. So on Friday, authorities will announce what are believed to be the last measures before heading into the government's Living with COVID-19 strategy. And these measures take effect on Monday and will most likely last for 2 weeks. Many are expecting either an extension of the ones they're implementing now and potentially some forms of vaccine incentives.
Now, speaking of incentives, Yeun, some countries have already seen quite a lot of success. Can you tell us more on that?
The U.S. has expanded its vaccine incentives to even foreigners, and the Department of Homeland Security said Wednesday that the U.S. will reopen land borders with Mexico and Canada to fully vaccinated travelers from November, some 19 months after they were closed. They curbed travel from Mexico and Canada since March 2020, and we can evaluate this as one of the many efforts the Biden administration has taken to try and boost vaccination rates. As of now, more than 56% of Americans have been fully vaccinated. And if we move on to Singapore, it has actually finished fully inoculating 83% of its population. Only the vaccinated are now allowed to drink and eat at coffee shops and restaurants, and those that haven't been vaccinated can only order takeout. They'll also be restricted from visiting shopping malls. And these measures took effect from Wednesday, but a grace period will be applied over the next week.
Well, it seems a touch heavy-handed on Singapore's behalf, for me at least. We've seen how people in France and Italy and other countries in Europe have reacted when these kind of restrictions are put in place on the unvaccinated people. But talking about countries with high vaccination rates, let's talk about countries that are unfortunately, for whatever reason, lagging behind in terms of vaccination rates. Africa especially is a real problem right now.
Right. Africa is only seeing 7% of the population have only received a single dose. And that's why the Director General of the WHO asked countries to refrain from using booster shots until more of the world gets at least one jab.
Yes, getting the global vaccination rate up is very important, as this virus doesn't seem to care about borders, right?
No respect for borders at all.
Thank you so much for your report, Yin, and see you tomorrow again.
Thank you.
Now it's time that we move on to On Point, where we speak to experts to dig that little bit deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. And of course, COVID-19 is always in the spotlight. South Korea on Wednesday took its first steps in nearly 2 years since COVID-19 arrived on these shores to start the transition to normalcy. And as Yeon just mentioned, its so-called living with COVID system, it held its first meeting of a joint government civilian committee that is tasked with getting Korea gradually back to the way things were prior to the arrival of this virus.
Yes, and Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum, who chaired the meeting, said there should be a phased return. For more on this and related virus response measures, we connect to Dr. Alice Tan, internist at Ms. Mary Women's Hospital in Seoul. Now, firstly, Dr. Tan, with around 70% of South Korea's population forecasted to be vaccinated by the end of October, do you think the decision to start this transition now comes at the right time?
Well, I think this is the right time to start planning for the transition. The transition will be gradual. It will not be a sudden on-off switch kind of maneuver. Right now, we are seeing high numbers, high percentages of vaccinations, and also the number of cases does seem to be going down. The number of cases of unknown epidemiological link finally dipped below 10,000. This is the first time it's done this since September 24th. The effective reproductive number is also below 1. My biggest concern, though, is over the last 2 weeks, 687 cases were diagnosed over the age of 80, and 75% of them had been fully vaccinated. So we do really need to work on our booster vaccine campaign. But I think this is the right time to start transitioning.
Okay, so you're in essential agreement with what's happening right now. But the Prime Minister at that meeting on Wednesday raised the prospect of introducing a vaccine pass. Didn't really get into the specifics of what that might look like here. However, since over a fifth of the population of South Korea has, thus far anyway, decided against getting the shot, do you foresee the South Korean government attempting to try and mandate vaccinations just like the Biden administration has done in the US?
I think there will be certain institutions and groups that require vaccination. I can see perhaps the federal government of Korea requiring vaccinations for government employees. I'm fairly certain all hospitals will require COVID vaccinations. Also, private institutions such as universities, some private schools will probably require vaccination. Just as they already require vaccination against other diseases such as measles and chickenpox. So it's not unexpected that this kind of mandate will be put in place. I mean, the bottom line is COVID is bad for business. And so a lot of private businesses, if I were the employer, I would mandate a vaccine, not just for health and safety reasons, but also for economic and business reasons in order to keep businesses open. So I'm not exactly sure the extent of the mandates. Hopefully, people will just volunteer to get vaccinated as much as possible.
Now, Dr. Tan, during the meeting, the Prime Minister also said the transition does not mean taking off face masks immediately. Now, Western countries with similar vaccination rates to Korea, like most Scandinavian nations, have lifted such rules, especially outside. Now, why do you think the Korean government is more cautious on the wearing of masks, both inside and outside? And when do you foresee the mask rule being lifted here?
Well, there are some particular specific conditions in Korea that need to be taken into consideration. First of all, Korea, and especially the Seoul metropolitan area, is one of the most highly population dense regions in the world. Also, culturally, people in Korea tend to work and play, commute in groups. And finally, there are some limitations, I think, in terms of healthcare capacity. Almost all of the ICU beds in Korea, I would say the vast majority, are in an open ward system. ICU patients, only a minority are actually in single rooms. And so I think there are limitations also in our healthcare system that make the mandate of wearing a mask indoors and outdoors just a safe precaution as we transition to a more normal state.
Right. And Doctor, finally, before we let you go, many health experts in South Korea have been concerned that the back-to-back three-day weekends would lead to a fresh mega surge in new cases. It hasn't really materialized yet. Anyway, today we might see some bigger figures. But would you say now that South Korea is over the worst of it, it's kind of mostly out of the woods, or are you concerned about a fifth wave hitting, potentially with new variants, when the weather starts getting colder?
Yes, so as you've said, cold and flu season is upon us. The weather is colder, it's drier. My other big concern is what I mentioned before, the breakthrough cases among fully vaccinated elderly Koreans, especially those over the age of 80. I think this really
it appears the
very urgent.
If you could just repeat what you said the past 30 seconds, your feed just froze for about half a minute there.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. So my concern is about the number of positive cases among the elderly population in Korea. And I think there's an urgent need to deliver booster shots to the elders. In terms of whether or not we're over the worst of it, I'm cautiously optimistic that we have peaked. The fourth wave has peaked. However, my concern is that the test positivity was actually higher than 5% on a few days this last week, on the 10th and on the 11th. And so what we may be seeing is just an artifact of decreased testing, not actually fewer cases.
Now, Dr. Tan, thank you so much for your insights on the move to slowly lift virus restrictions and resume normal life in Korea. We appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, perhaps we'll finally see some light at the end of this tunnel, and we apologize to our viewers for the technical difficulties we had there. Dr. Alice Tan, thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, moving on to other news, it has emerged that policymakers at the Federal Reserve broadly agreed last month that the Fed should begin reducing its enormous bond buying program and start tapering from as soon as mid-November.
The minutes of the Federal Open Market Committee's September meeting were released Wednesday, showing they agreed a gradual tapering process that concludes around the middle of 2022 would be appropriate. They also noted the process would commence in either mid-November or mid-December. Fed officials signaled in September that they were close to scaling down their monthly asset purchases of $120 billion. The White House is exerting efforts to address the bottleneck in the global transportation supply chain, which threatens to disrupt America's holiday season. As part of such efforts, President Biden has announced a round-the-clock work schedule for the Port of Los Angeles to try and get more supplies on the road and into stores. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The Biden administration is stepping up efforts to tackle the supply chain bottlenecks that have led to shortages of some goods and higher consumer prices, which is threatening to disrupt the U.S. holiday season. President Biden announced Wednesday that the Port of Los Angeles will be working on a 24/7 schedule, bringing it in line with operations at the Port of Long Beach, which is already operating nonstop. Those two ports handle 40% of America's total container traffic. Calling this a big first step, President Biden also called for the private sector to step up their own efforts.
This is a big first step in speeding up the movement of materials and goods through our supply chain. But now we need the rest of the private sector chain to step up as well. This is not called a supply chain for nothing. This means that terminal operators, railways, trucking companies, shippers, and other retailers as well.
The decision follows Biden's meeting with senior officials and stakeholders, including port operators, truckers associations, and major shippers, which included South Korea's Samsung Electronics. The administration's measures are being dubbed a, quote, 90-day sprint. The U.S. is not the only country facing a supply chain nightmare. Britain's largest commercial port reportedly has 50,000 containers waiting to be collected due to a shortage of truck drivers. This means containers are being offloaded but left stacked in the ports. This is also causing delays in returning empty containers for reuse. Such a logjam is causing widespread concerns among retailers about future inventories. In other parts of the world, countries are facing similar problems as ports are congested due to the rapid rebound in demand for commodities and goods as many economies recover from the pandemic. Shipping costs have soared, and companies that want their goods shipped are finding it hard to secure enough ships or containers. This all comes amid a hike in consumer prices around the world. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea saw its export and import prices rise last month amid soaring international oil prices. The import price index was especially affected, pushing the figure up more than 25% on year. Seo Eun-kyung reports.
South Korea's export and import prices both rose in September. The Bank of Korea said on Thursday the export price index increased by 1% on month, rising for the 10th straight month to just over 114. Compared to a year before, that's a rise of more than 20%, posting 8 straight months of gains. The increase in export prices was mainly driven by higher prices of industrial goods like petroleum and chemical products, as well as agricultural and fishery products. Import prices also increased. The central bank largely attributes the increase to rising global oil prices. The import price index stood at 124.58, up 2.4% on month. It surged by more than 26% on year. This is mainly due to an increase in the price of coal and petroleum products as the price of Dubai crude, South Korea's benchmark, skyrocketed. Dubai oil prices averaged $72.63 in September, jumping 75% on year. This in turn increased the prices of imported consumer goods and raw materials, triggering inflationary pressure. Consumer goods rose by 2.7% and raw materials surged 68% on year. In fact, South Korea's consumer prices have seen on-year rise of more than 2% for 6 months in a row as of October, leading the government to vow to step up efforts to stabilize prices. Seo Eun-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea's unification minister on Wednesday took a ride on a boat to sail to the estuary where the Han River meets the West Sea. It's a region that has essentially become a nature preserve. While there, the minister suggested cross-border talks take place at the site, saying it represents peace. Kim Da-mi with the details.
Once called the Jo River, Jo meaning grandfather, the Han River estuary used to be a busy waterway transporting people and goods from the West Sea to the inland port of Mapunaru. Having lain almost undisturbed since the Korean War, it was visited on Wednesday for the first time by a civilian vessel from the south. On board the boat, Seoul's Unification Minister Lee In-young said the estuary is a peace zone for the two Koreas, and he again voiced hope for an early resumption of inter-Korean dialogue and implementation of the two Koreas' agreements and cooperative projects.
The Han River estuary is a space of open possibilities that stimulates new approaches and creativity in planning inter-Korean cooperation, such as enforcing the sanctions on the north in a flexible manner.
Though entry to the Han River estuary has been highly restricted over the years, it has been important in building peace. In the October 4th Declaration of 2007, Seoul and Pyongyang agreed in principle that the estuary should be used actively by both sides. And in a military agreement signed at a 2018 summit between President Moon Jae-in and the North leader Kim Jong-un, the two sides agreed to allow the joint use of the estuary and conducted joint research on the waterway that November. Now, Seoul is hoping to improve ties at an early date, especially considering the recent restoration of communication channels.
We hope to secure a video system the two Koreas can use to hold a virtual summit and other high-level talks to improve inter-Korean ties.
The minister further pledged to continue working to implement the peace projects agreed so far and to engage with the North to propose new ones. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
South Korea's ambassador to the US says the allies are working closely to restart the Korean Peninsula peace process. At an annual parliamentary audit Wednesday, Lee Soo-hyuk said Seoul and Washington are discussing ways to create a favorable condition for talks with North Korea, including by possibly providing humanitarian aid. He also said the US understands the rational purpose behind seeking a formal end to the Korean War that was proposed last month by President Moon Jae-in at the UN General Assembly. South Korea's chief nuclear envoy will hold talks in the coming hours with his Russian counterpart in Moscow on ways to get North Korea back to denuclearization talks, according to Seoul's foreign ministry. No Kyu-dak and Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov will hold in-depth discussions on ways to restart the peace process on the peninsula. The talks will mark their first face-to-face since Morgulov visited Seoul in August. Those talks included US Special Representative for North Korea Sung Kim. Back then, the three sides discussed ways to re-engage the North in talks on its nuclear program.
Officials from around 30 countries are joining a two-day virtual meeting hosted by the White House National Security Council. The transnational ransomware meeting, scheduled for Wednesday and Thursday, marks the first gathering of its size purely focused on cybersecurity. Among the participating nations, South Korea, the UK, France, India, as well as the EU. The agenda includes cracking down on the illegal use of cryptocurrency and ways to improve collaboration between law enforcement agencies to prosecute cybercriminals. Japan's new Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is set to dissolve the National Diet's lower house, the House of Representatives. The dissolution will officially be announced at 1 in the afternoon local time, marking a first in more than 4 years as the country prepares for the upcoming general election on October 31st. According to GG Press, the spotlight will be on whether the ruling Liberal Democratic Party and its junior coalition partner Komeito can together maintain a majority of seats in the lower chamber. We now cross over to our Oh Se-young for Global Insight for an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It's now time for Global Insight, where we connect with people around the world on issues making headlines. Well, business has been booming for IT giant Samsung Electronics in recent months. Having overtaken Intel as the largest chip maker, Samsung expects to record its biggest ever quarterly sales in its Q3 figures, also marking the biggest quarterly profit seen since 2018. And this is mostly thanks to its strong sales of memory chips amid strong global demand. Now, new Galaxy foldable and flippable phones, they've also sold like hotcakes after their release in late August. But the question is, will the company continue to streak ahead? A new global digital tax on large conglomerates, companies, and falling demand for memory chips might mean that there are bumps ahead for South Korea's largest company. We discussed these challenges with Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea, and Ricky Villacrez, US Editor of GSM Arena. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us today. And well, let's get started with this global tax, Professor Yang. Now, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, South Korea's largest two chip makers, they're expected to be subject to Pillar 1 of the G20's digital tax. So first of all, what does Pillar 1 mean for these two companies?
Okay, well, let's explain what the Pillar 1 is first. If you're a multinational company and your revenues are greater than 20 billion euros, that's about 23 billion US dollars or 27.5 trillion won. And if they work in many different countries, if they earn money from many different countries and they earn more than 1 million euros from a in a foreign country, or 250,000 euros from a relatively small country, and if they earn more than 10% profit, then of that extra profit over 10%, they have to pay 25% of that in taxes. Right now, it seems that Samsung and Hynix are probably the only firms which are going to be affected by the law for now. But while we're calling this a digital tax because the negotiations originally started out dealing with IT companies, right now the negotiations have seemed to have gone further than that, and it may be applicable to more general multinational companies as well, except for financial companies and what they call extraction companies, which are mostly natural resources, especially oil. Other companies which are not particularly related to IT may be affected by this Pillar 1 as well. And in this case, you'll have to pay taxes to many, many different countries, depending on how profitable are your operations in that particular country.
So it looks like there's quite a bit of complications ahead for the South Korean companies. Well, the South Korean government, Professor Yang, has been quite wary of this, the potential impact the global tax might have on the country's largest companies. So how are firms like Samsung Electronics expected to be affected by the tax, and what kind of adjustments do you think they're going to have to make?
Okay, well, they haven't calculated it explicitly yet because it's a very complex calculation. But they have tried to simulate something for Samsung. And on their last quarter, their operating profit was about 36 trillion won. So they figured they'll have to pay about 600 billion won in taxes to different countries. And if Samsung earns, say, $60 trillion of operating profit per year, that would mean about 1.4 trillion won taxes that may be going to other countries. Now, having said that, the total tax bill for Samsung may not change all that much because the government has promised that there will be no double taxation. So if they pay taxes elsewhere, they don't have to pay taxes to Korean government. So it may affect the Korean government more than the company itself. Also, the original impetus for rules like this have to do with what's called transfer pricing. When the multinationals export parts to other countries' subsidiaries, they have certain freedom on how they're going to price those intermediate goods. And a lot of people are arguing that those type of pricing control over how they price intermediate parts abroad can be used for tax evasion. So this may be expanded to include those type of transfer tax problems as well. But remember, right now, they started this negotiations with digital companies, but there's nothing in the rules right now that says that it's applicable only to digital companies. So they may actually expand to include some other very profitable Korean companies.
Now let's bring Ricky Villacrez into the conversation. Mr. Villacrez, Samsung Electronics, it's expected to record its biggest ever quarterly revenue in Q3, and this was largely down to its semiconductor business. So what's led to the boost in demand for memory chips, and what edge does Samsung currently have over other memory chip makers?
Yes, so great question. When the chip shortage began back in late 2019, early 2020, the companies were stuck. So Samsung was able to expand. They have the capital and the capacity to expand their chip foundries, and they are continuing to do these expansions so that they can meet the demand that is still on the slack side. There's still a lot of demand to be met. There's still a lot of capacity to be made for these new chip demand. So Samsung currently, what they have to do now is they need to keep expanding, and they need to expand their foundry business so that they can continue having that edge over companies like Hynix and TSMC.
Mr. Villacrez, from what I understand, there's been something of a global chip shortage. How did this chip shortage start?
Yeah, so of course, great question. So in late 2019, going into 2020, there were all these electronic and consumer companies, and there was all this innovation, and there was a lot of smart appliances, and there's a lot of new smartphones. There's a lot of 5G is coming. So there's a self-driving cars and advancements in medicine. There's so much technology coming, and there was only a handful of companies making these semiconductor chips. And when COVID-19 hit, obviously production had to halt for a long time, and because of this halt, and it caused a shockwave in the entire supply chain that we are still seeing today. And that constraint that's going on in the supply chain right now is what we're still feeling now, and why we're still talking about the shortage, and why we might continue to see this shortage until companies like Samsung and SK Hynix can catch up to demand. And I don't think that this demand is going to slow down anytime soon, especially with the holiday shopping season coming.
Professor Young, some local experts, though, they've been expecting demand to slow down. Do you know why that is?
Well, there has been some speculation that a lot of chip makers were buying the semiconductors to prepare themselves for a possible shortage. So in a sense, they've been stocking up. And because they've been stocking up, they won't need to buy as many semiconductors in the second half of the year. This kind of talk has been around since actually middle of last year. They were always expecting that because the users were stockpiling semiconductors, that the demand would fall in about 3 to 6 months. Now, it's continually been surprising that that is not happening. Now, it does seem that the users are stocking up, but perhaps because demand continues to be strong, that we keep expecting to see semiconductor exports and semiconductor demand fall in about 3 to 6 months. We never see it. So at least for now, it does seem that semiconductor demand will remain strong. The only problem is when you're producing electronics, it's not necessarily only the semiconductors that you need to produce these goods. So there might be some shortages in other parts that restricts production, which in turn affects the demand for semiconductors. But for now, even though the reasons are not entirely clear, you're probably better off betting that the strong demand will continue for the next few months.
And Professor Yang, so with the current strong demand for memory chips, and also Samsung's new foldable, flippable phones, of course, as well as their wearables, it looks like the company does have a promising future. But Samsung's stock prices, though, they've been on a downward trend recently, and Goldman Sachs, in fact, they revised the IT giant's target stock price down to $100 1,001 per share, and SK Hynix also saw a downward revision. What's the reason for the slump in stock prices?
Okay, well, the most popular reason that's given is that whatever profits we see had already been baked into the stock prices. So what they're calculating now with the lower stock prices is something which is relatively far off into the future. Again, with the possible reduction in the strong demand for semiconductors, I'm not quite sure if I particularly believe in that, because they've been saying this for the last 18 months or so, and Samsung has continually beaten estimates of how they will be doing. But it is clear that there seems to be a lot of uncertainty in estimating what the semiconductor demand will be in the next few months to a year. And also, because Samsung concentrates so much on memory chips, the DRAM chips, and DRAM chips, again, depend on production. That depends also on other parts that seems to be not in steady supply right now. There might be bottlenecks for those other parts. The demand for memory chips does seem to be falling a bit in the last few months, and that might be preying on the analysts' estimations.
And Mr. Vellecrest, how long do you expect this global chip shortage to last?
It's a very difficult question to answer, because there's many different factors, including how fast can these companies scale, and is the global economy going to continue this demand of electronics and innovations? So, like the professor said, there has been speculation that it would only last a few months, but we're still going through it. And there's been speculation that it would last to the first half of this upcoming year, going into the second half of next year. So it's difficult to predict exactly when we can start seeing more of the demand catching up.
Right, and Professor Yang, given the elasticity of semiconductor prices and supplies, how should Samsung strengthen its revenue stream?
Okay, well, Samsung has been planning to do this for a long time. Memory chips are basically commodity goods. Right now, Korea has a unique position in the global economy where they're perfectly suited to make these memory chips, which are high-tech, but perhaps not really, very, very high-tech. So China is trying to catch up, and Samsung and Hynix need to adjust for that. How they were adjusting for it was to try to get into so-called system chips, where they are going to things like CPUs and graphic chips, program chips which have programs that could be adapted. If you make more of those system chips, and they should give you some more of a monopolistic power, so that prices will be more steadier. You don't have to face as much competition from newcomers in China and elsewhere. If they do make that leap to the system chips, then Samsung should have a much more steady stream of income. But the problem is you need much more human capital. You need many more technicians, and Samsung has been having a hard time moving into that. Another form of possible profit center is foundries, where you physically manufacture chips. But personally, I'm not sure that's a good industry to move into, but it's not really a high margin industry. So I'm not sure if that's going to form a profit center, but Samsung probably want to work with foundries anyway, because it is crucial for their chip production.
Right, and Samsung certainly has been looking to expand its foundry business. And Mr. Vellecrest, what does this really mean for the company?
Yes, so Samsung is just behind TSMC in terms of high-end system on a chips, like the professor was mentioning. For example, in the iPhone's performance with the TSMC-made Apple chips are slightly superior on paper. But Samsung what they need to do now is they need to expand their chip business while also pushing innovations. So what this means for Samsung is they are trying to get chips to be more efficient and smaller so that they can be used in more applications and to solve more of these problems that that these chips are being installed in. So it is it's coming with innovations on making them so much smaller so that they can be more powerful and more power efficient.
Right, well, that's all the time we have for the interview today. That was Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at Catholic University of Korea, and Ricky Villacrez, US Editor of GSM Arena. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
The South Korean drama series Squid Game has become Netflix's most successful original content over the past 28 days, with a staggering 111 million households having already binge-watched at least part of the series. The show has also triggered renewed interest in Korea's language, its culture, and also its childhood games. Of course, Kim Yeon-sung reports.
This is the sound of an age-old Korean children's game, 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다, or red light, green light in English, coming from a playground in Singapore. Although there have been many variations of a game like this one played in school playgrounds all across the world, this particular version is proving popular due to the success of Squid Game. Netflix said Wednesday that more than 111 million households have watched Squid Game in less than a month since its release. Other than being the first non-English content to come in at #1 in the US market, Squid Game has topped charts in 93 other countries and is ringing in as the most successful Netflix original content of all time.
Korean content is here to stay with Parasite and BTS and Squid Game. And there's a reason Netflix invested and Disney and Apple are investing all that money in Korean content, because it's here to stay and it's going to take a bigger chunk of the entertainment dollar.
With the increased interest in South Korean content, learning the Korean language has also become a desired skill. Duolingo, a popular language learning app, said that in the last 2 weeks, it saw a 76% increase in the UK and a 40% increase in the US in new users joining to learn Korean.
When I started learning Korean 2 years ago, people didn't understand why, but now Korean is more mainstream in the Western world, and people get fascinated when I say that I'm learning Korean.
Meanwhile, a cafe in Singapore has started selling dalgona, a honeycomb candy that makes an appearance in the show. There, customers can attempt to pick out the engraved shape in the candy for a modest prize. But of course, they don't get shot if they fail, like the contestants do in Squid Game.
I think I almost made it. This little chip here. I think if we are so strict as in the game, in the real TV show.
A similar establishment has also appeared in Shanghai, where people wait more than 30 minutes to join in the fun. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
There are plenty of products and services being developed for individuals looking to reduce their carbon footprint. One event showcases tech at the very forefront of the global push toward net zero carbon. Our Kim Sung-min went to the 2021 Net Zero Expo and files this report.
This wind turbine model might look small, but 100 full-size turbines can replace a thermal power plant. This moving solar panel has a special sensor that follows the sun to pick up the maximum rays. As South Korea aims to go carbon neutral by 2050, these green technologies are becoming more crucial than ever in securing and diversifying sustainable sources of energy. And that is why the government is holding its first Net Zero Expo, where almost 300 firms are gathered to showcase their green energy products and technologies.
While achieving net zero is a crucial goal, that process also bears possible risks like we're currently seeing in China. To avoid this, technological innovation is crucial, and we expect this expo to provide momentum for such innovation.
As the country's green transition picks up pace, a wide range of products could appeal to customers with different needs. This colored solar panel not only saves energy, but can also serve as a great decoration for the outside of a building.
Going carbon neutral means changes also have to come from us individuals in our daily lives. Just like this solar panel that generates enough electricity for families to easily charge their electric cars at home.
Other than installing solar panels, ordinary households can contribute to cutting carbon emissions by only using home appliances like air conditioners that are energy efficient. And here at the expo, the booths themselves are green, with LG Electronics setting up a booth made from recyclable resources and waste wood.
The container for our booth will be donated after the event is over. Our product packaging is also recyclable. We also aim to cut carbon emissions during production by 50% and have longer plans of switching to renewable energy at all our facilities.
Running from October 13th to 15th, the event aims to serve as a space where companies can freely interact with customers while also seeking possible expo routes. There are also various programs for the general public, including live streaming shows and online quiz shows. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Wednesday that the Biden administration plans to press ahead with its plan to reopen its Jerusalem consulate that traditionally engages with the Palestinians despite strong opposition from Israel. The announcement comes as Washington's top diplomat reiterated a pledge he originally made months ago to re-establish the consulate, which had long been a base of diplomatic outreach to the Palestinians before it was closed by former President Donald Trump. However, speaking at a news conference with visiting foreign ministers of Israel and the UAE, Blinken stopped short of setting a date for the reopening. The plans for reopening is part of the Biden administration's goal of repairing relations with the Palestinians, which have been badly damaged under the Trump administration. The consulate was subsumed into the U.S. embassy that was moved to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv back in 2018 by Trump. The Biden administration added it will reopen the consulate while leaving the embassy in place. Star Trek's Captain Kirk, William Shatner, flew aboard a Blue Origin rocket ship on Wednesday, becoming the oldest person ever in space. At the age of 90, Shatner was one of 4 passengers to journey to the edge of space aboard the fully autonomous New Shepard spacecraft, which took off from Texas. The 4 passengers experienced about 3 to 4 minutes of weightlessness and traveled above the internationally recognized boundary of space before returning to Earth. And for Shatner, the experience was literally out of this world.
What you have given me is the most profound experience I can imagine. I'm so filled with emotion about what just happened. It's extraordinary, extraordinary. I hope I never recover from this. I hope that I can maintain what I feel now. I don't want to lose it.
The space trip also marked the second space tourism flight for Blue Origin, which billionaire businessman Jeff Bezos' company founded 2 decades ago. The U.S. FDA on Tuesday authorized e-cigarette products for the first time ever, allowing for the British American Tobacco to sell its Vuse e-cigarettes and its cartridges used for refills. The latest announcement comes as the FDA last month delayed its decision on whether Juul and other major e-cigarette manufacturers, including BAT, can sell their products in the U.S. as it weighed the public health impact of the products. The FDA's director at the Center for Tobacco Products said the manufacturer's data showed its tobacco-flavored products could benefit addicted adult smokers with a significant reduction in cigarette consumption by reducing their exposure to harmful chemicals. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Jacket weather to start the day, then getting warmer by the afternoon, but it will be slightly breezier than yesterday afternoon with more patches of clouds. But overall, a pleasant autumn days in the forecast. Morning temperatures are slightly higher than the same time yesterday under lots of autumn sunshine. But those in the south will need to drive with care as fog has built up. Now, daytime highs in most regions will be 2 to 4 degrees higher than seasonal norms, 23 degrees here in Seoul, Daegu and Gwangju at 26 degrees. It's a good day for an afternoon stroll. It will get cloudy again tomorrow, but temperatures will stay near the seasonal averages. Then rain on southern provinces will trigger an autumn cold snap for the country. And by Sunday morning, lows in Seoul will plunge to just 1 degree Celsius winter-like temperatures. And we might need a winter jacket for mornings and evenings through early next week, and conditions will become much chillier from then. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world. And that's the end of this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. Thank you for spending the past hour with us. We appreciate your viewership. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Mark Broom. I'll be back in just over an hour from now at 10 a.m. Korea time with our next newscast. Both Mo-kyan and I will be here at the same time on Friday for the last edition of the week of New Day at Arirang. Wherever you are watching us around the world, thanks for tuning in. Goodbye.
Goodbye.